In the small and peaceful village of Kimbala, Abony's life was turned upside down in a single moment. At just 16, she lost her father, the only person who had ever truly cared for her. He was her shield, her comfort, and her guide, and without him, the world suddenly felt cold and empty. The sound of people mourning in the village could not compare to the silence that filled her heart. Every corner of her home reminded her of him, his chair by the fire, the tools he used, even the way he used to call her name. Nothing felt the same anymore. But grief was not the only storm she had to face. Soon after the funeral, her uncle Joram stepped forward. He spoke with a smile, promising the neighbors that he would look after his niece like she was his own child. On the outside, his words sounded comforting, but in Abony's heart, something felt uneasy. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that family would never abandon her, but deep inside, she sensed his eyes were not filled with love, but with something else she couldn't name yet. Every night, Abony cried quietly, clutching the small memories of her father, wishing he would walk through the door again. She felt trapped between sorrow and fear of what was coming next. Little did she know, her uncle's words of care were only the beginning of another heartbreak, one that would test her strength in ways she could never imagine. At first, Abony tried to convince herself that her uncle Joram really meant well. He was her father's brother after all, and family was supposed to stand together in times of sorrow. But it didn't take long before his real face started to show. The gentle promises of care soon turned into harsh words that cut deeper than knives. Whenever Abony cried at night, missing her father, Joram would laugh cruelly. "Stop those useless tears," he barked. "You're nothing but a burden now." Those words stung her more than she could explain. She had just lost her only parent, and instead of comfort, she was treated like a stranger in her own home. The house that once felt safe now carried a heavy silence. Joram's eyes never seemed to rest on Abony with kindness. Instead, he looked around at the small house her father had worked so hard to build. The walls, the land, the little garden, everything her father left behind became the center of his greedy thoughts. At night, when Abony pretended to sleep, she would hear him whispering with his wife. Their voices were low, but the words pierced through the darkness. "We can sell this place," he murmured. "With that money, our life will be easier." His wife agreed, her tone sharp and eager. To them, the house was just a piece of property. To Abony, it was the last piece of her father's love. Every day, the atmosphere grew heavier. Joram stopped hiding his irritation toward her. If she asked for food, he complained she ate too much. If she sat quietly in a corner, he accused her of being lazy. No matter what she did, it was never enough. Slowly, Abony began to realize the cruel truth. Her uncle never cared about her future, her safety, or her broken heart. He only cared about the inheritance, the house, and the land. She remembered the way he stood at the funeral, pretending to be her guardian, speaking to the neighbors about taking care of the girl. Now she saw those words for what they were. A performance, a mask to hide the greed underneath. The realization broke her even more. She was not only fatherless, but also unwanted in the very home she grew up in. Her heart ached every time she looked at her father's belongings, knowing Joram wanted to erase them all for money. She felt trapped, too young to fight back, too powerless to stop what was coming. Still, she held onto a small flicker of hope, whispering prayers in the quiet of the night. Deep inside, she wished her father's spirit could protect her somehow. But in her heart, she knew the storm had only begun, and her uncle's cruelty was just the start of a darker path, waiting for her. That night was colder than usual in Kimbala. The wind howled through the trees, rattling the old wooden windows. Abony lay awake on her thin mattress, clutching the small scarf her father once gave her. Sleep never came easy anymore, not with the constant fear of what her uncle might do next. Her heart carried a heaviness that words could not describe, but nothing could have prepared her for what happened at 2 a.m. She heard the sound of keys turning in the lock, the metal clicking sharply in the silence. Her stomach tightened with dread. Before she could even sit up, the door swung open. Joram's figure stood in the doorway, his face twisted with anger and impatience. Without a word, he marched inside, grabbed her small suitcase, the one she had packed with just a few clothes and her father's old photograph, and dragged it out into the cold night. "Uncle, please." Her voice trembled as she followed him, her bare feet against the cold floor. But he didn't stop. He shoved the suitcase outside and then turned to her with a glare that froze her heart. "This is my house now," he spat, his voice dripping with bitterness. "You're nothing without your father. Do you hear me? Nothing." Before she could respond, his rough hands pushed her out the door. She stumbled, nearly falling onto the hard ground, her body shaking not just from the cold but from the shock of being thrown away like garbage. The door slammed shut behind her with a final, echoing thud. For a moment, Ebony just stood there under the vast, starless sky, the night swallowing her whole. She hugged herself tightly, her thin dress no match for the biting wind. Tears rolled down her cheeks, blurring her vision as her breath came out in broken sobs. The street was empty, silent except for the distant cry of a dog. No one saw. No one came to help. She looked down at her suitcase, the only thing she had left, and even that felt too heavy to carry in her trembling hands. With nowhere to go, she sat on the edge of the street, curling her knees to her chest. Memories of her father filled her mind, how he used to hold her close when storms frightened her, how he promised he would always protect her. But now he was gone, and the man who claimed to take his place had betrayed her in the cruelest way. The hours dragged on slowly as she sat shivering in the dark. Every sound made her heart race. The rustling of leaves, the echo of footsteps that never came, the creak of distant houses. She felt abandoned not only by her family but by the entire world. Yet, somewhere deep inside, beneath the pain and fear, a small voice whispered to her, "This is not the end. You will survive this night." And so, with tears drying on her cheeks and a broken heart inside her chest, Ebony stood up from the cold ground. She didn't know where she was going, but she knew one thing. She would never forget this night at 2 a.m., the night her life truly changed forever. The nights after being thrown out were the hardest. Ebony wandered the dusty roads of Nakuru, carrying her small suitcase everywhere she went. She had no home, no bed, no warm meal waiting for her. When the sun set, she often curled up outside churches, hoping the walls of God's house would at least give her some comfort. The cold ground was rough, the air was biting, and sometimes the guards would chase her away, but she kept coming back, because it was the only place where she felt even a little safe. Hunger became her constant companion. There were days when her stomach growled so loudly it hurt, but she swallowed her pride and begged for scraps. Some people dropped coins into her hands, others gave her half-eaten bread, and many simply walked past as if she was invisible. Strangers pitied her, yes, but pity never filled her belly, and it never gave her a roof over her head. At night, when she lay awake, she wondered if her father could see her from heaven, if he knew how much she missed him and how alone she felt. But even in her darkest hours, Ebony refused to give up. She started helping in the market, carrying heavy baskets for women, cleaning tables in small food stalls, running errands for shopkeepers. The coins she earned were tiny, barely enough for food. Still, instead of spending them all on bread, she carefully saved a portion for books. She would go to second-hand stalls, flipping through torn pages, buying whatever she could afford. People laughed at her sometimes, saying, "What good are books to a hungry girl?" But Ebony held them close, because deep inside she knew the truth. Education was the only weapon that could lift her out of this life. Every evening, after long hours of work, she sat under dim streetlights or outside closed shops, reading. Her eyes burned from exhaustion, her hands shook from hunger, but she turned every page with determination. Each word gave her strength, each lesson gave her hope. She dreamed of classrooms she could not yet enter, of exams she longed to pass, of a future where no one could call her nothing again. The days turned into months. Her clothes grew older, her body thinner, but her spirit remained unbroken. Sometimes she whispered to herself, "I will not stay here forever. One day they will see me rise." Those words became her prayer, her promise, her anchor. Life in the streets was cruel, but it also taught her resilience. She learned to survive storms, hunger, loneliness, and shame. Yet through it all, she held on to one burning truth. Her uncle might have thrown her out at 2 a.m., but he could never throw away her dreams. And that dream, as fragile as it seemed, was the fire that kept her alive. The roadside cafe was noisy, filled with the clatter of cups, the smell of roasted maize, and the endless chatter of travelers passing through. Ebony worked there quietly, wiping tables, carrying trays, and washing dishes until her hands ached. But during her short breaks, instead of resting, she would pull out a tattered book and lose herself in its pages. It didn't matter if the book was old, torn, or borrowed. Those words were her escape, her secret weapon, her way of keeping the fire of hope alive. One afternoon, as she sat in a corner with a second-hand math book, someone's eyes lingered on her longer than usual. It was Mama Zawadi, an elderly retired teacher known in the community for her wisdom and kindness. She often stopped by the cafe for tea, and each time she saw Ebony, she noticed the same thing. The girl's hunger was not just for food, but for knowledge. "Child," Mama Zawadi said one day, her voice soft but steady, "why do you read so much instead of resting? Most girls your age only think about clothes or friends." Ebony looked up nervously, clutching the book to her chest. "Because books are the only way I can change my life," she whispered. Her eyes brimmed with honesty and pain. "I don't want to be trapped forever. I want to learn. I want to be someone." Those words touched something deep in Mama Zawadi's heart. She had taught thousands of children in her lifetime, but in Ebony's eyes, she saw a fire that could not be ignored. From that day on, she began to sit with the girl, asking questions, offering small bits of advice, and watching her determination grow. One evening, after seeing how tirelessly Ebony worked and studied, Mama Zawadi made a decision. "You will not waste away here," she told her firmly. "From tomorrow, I will sponsor your schooling. You belong in a classroom, not just in a cafe." For the first time in months, Ebony felt her heart lift with hope. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she whispered, "Thank you, Mama. I will not disappoint you." And she didn't. With fierce determination, Ebony threw herself into her studies. She walked long distances to school, worked at the cafe in the evenings, and still studied late into the night by candlelight. Each page she turned, each test she passed, was fueled by the memory of that night at 2 a.m. when she was thrown into the street. She promised herself she would never again let anyone decide her worth. Mama Zawadi became more than a sponsor. She became a mentor, a guide, almost the mother Ebony had lost long ago. Under her watchful eye, Ebony's world slowly began to change. The girl who once begged for scraps now held books with pride, and deep inside, she knew this was only the beginning of her rise. Years rolled by, and the little girl who once shivered on the cold streets was no longer the same. Ebony poured her heart into her studies, never wasting a single opportunity. Every late night with her books, every candle burned down to its end, every tear shed in silence, all of it carried her closer to the future she dreamed of. When exam results came, her name was always at the very top. She earned scholarships that lifted heavy burdens from her shoulders, and with each step forward, she proved that her past would not define her. University in Nairobi opened a whole new world for her. The city was busy, full of challenges, but Ebony walked with purpose. She studied hard, but she also observed the world around her. She noticed the broken houses, the abandoned plots, and the families struggling to find safe homes. Where others saw empty land, she saw possibilities. Where others saw problems, she saw a chance to build. After graduation, armed with both knowledge and courage, she took a leap of faith. With a small loan and endless determination, Ebony began her journey in real estate. First, it was not easy. Many laughed at her, saying, "What does a young woman know about building?" Others doubted her because she had no family name to stand behind her. But she refused to give up. Brick by brick, deal by deal, she built her reputation. She turned forgotten pieces of land into beautiful estates where families could live and grow. Her vision was clear. She wasn't just building houses, she was building hope. Every project she completed felt like another stone laid in the foundation of her new life. Slowly, her name began to spread. Newspapers wrote about her. Investors began to trust her. Families blessed her for giving them homes. People started calling her the girl who turned pain into power. Yet, through all the success, Ebony never forgot where she came from. She remembered the hunger, the nights outside churches, the cruel words of her uncle, and the kindness of Mama Zawadi. Those memories kept her humble. Instead of chasing wealth for herself alone, she opened opportunities for others, giving jobs to young people, mentoring girls who had once been abandoned like her, and donating to schools that struggled. Looking at her growing empire, Abani sometimes stood in silence, letting the memories of her journey wash over her. From being thrown out at 2 a.m. to becoming one of the most respected women in Nairobi, her story was proof that brokenness could be rebuilt, and ashes could give rise to fire. She had once been told she was nothing without her father. Now the world saw her as a symbol of strength, courage, and hope. And though scars from her past remained in her heart, she wore them proudly, not as wounds but as proof of the battle she had overcome. While Abani was rising step by step, Joram's life was moving in the opposite direction. The same greed that made him throw his niece out of her father's house slowly began to destroy everything he owned. At first, he enjoyed the property he had taken, boasting to neighbors that he was now the man of the house. But greed has a way of eating people alive. He started chasing quick money schemes, making bad investments with people who promised riches. One by one, those deals collapsed, and instead of profit, they left him drowning in debt. The house that once stood as his pride became a burden. Repairs were too expensive, the walls began to crack, and the roof leaked whenever it rained. The small farm that Abani's father had cared for with love lay abandoned, weeds swallowing the land until nothing grew. The same neighbors who once listened to his proud words now whispered about his downfall, shaking their heads in pity. His children suffered the most. With no money left for their school fees, one by one they dropped out. Some roamed the streets looking for odd jobs, others simply stayed at home, frustrated and hopeless. His wife, who once joined him in plotting against Abani, grew bitter as poverty tightened its grip. Fights filled the house, loud enough for the entire village to hear. Joram, who once called Abani a burden, now carried the weight of his collapsing life on his own shoulders. Soon, even the house could no longer be called his. Debt collectors came knocking, and the property he fought so hard to steal slipped away from his hands. He moved from relative to relative, each visit shorter than the last, as no one wanted to carry his troubles for long. Pride turned into shame, and the man who once strutted through Kimbala with arrogance now avoided eye contact in the market. Desperation pushed him to the city, searching for affordable housing for his family. He had lost almost everything by then. His money, his respect, his home, and the future he once thought was secure. With a heavy heart, he walked into a new housing estate in Nairobi, hoping at least to find a place where his family could settle quietly. He picked up the lease papers, too distracted by worry to notice the details at first. But when his eyes finally landed on the name at the top, his hands began to tremble. There, written in bold, clear letters, was a name he knew all too well: Abani Cato, owner. The paper slipped from his fingers. For a moment he could not breathe. The very girl he had thrown out at 2 a.m., the child he once mocked and betrayed, was now the woman who owned the roof over his head. The cruel twist of fate hit him harder than any debt collector ever could. And in that moment, Joram realized the truth. His greed had not only destroyed him, it had led him straight back to the girl he had once cast aside. Joram walked into the new estate with heavy steps, his wife and children trailing behind him. Their clothes were worn, their faces tired, and their pride long gone. For weeks, they had been moving from place to place, searching for somewhere they could finally settle. The once proud man who threw his niece out like trash now carried the weight of failure on his shoulders. He hoped this housing estate would be different, affordable, decent, and far enough from Kimbala that no one would remember his shame. As they entered the compound, Joram's eyes swept across the clean paths, the tall gates, and the freshly painted houses. It was beautiful, far better than anything he had ever built for himself. A flicker of hope rose in his chest. Maybe here, his family could finally find peace. But as they walked closer to the office, something stopped him in his tracks. There, on the shining brass nameplate at the entrance, was a name that froze his blood: Abani Cato, owner. His jaw dropped, his legs felt weak. The world around him blurred as his mind raced back to that night at 2 a.m., the night he dragged a trembling girl out of her father's house, calling her nothing. That same girl, the orphan he threw into the cold street, now owned an entire estate, his only chance at shelter. His wife gasped when she saw the name. His children exchanged confused looks, whispering, "Isn't that Cousin Ebony?" Shame burned through Joram's body, hotter than fire. He wanted to turn back, to run, to hide, but desperation chained his feet to the ground. They had nowhere else to go. Whether he liked it or not, his family's survival now depended on the very person he once betrayed. Inside the office, the air was heavy with silence when Ebony appeared. She was no longer the fragile girl he had thrown out. She stood tall, dressed with elegance, her eyes calm but sharp. Years of struggle had carved strength into her, and success had wrapped her in confidence. For a moment, Joram couldn't even recognize her. This wasn't the crying orphan he abandoned, it was a woman who commanded respect. Their eyes met, and Joram's heart sank. All the cruelty, all the greed, all the lies he once spoke, it all came flooding back to him in that single look. He tried to open his mouth, but no words came out. His wife nudged him, urging him to speak, but even she couldn't hide the shame in her eyes. Ebony didn't shout. She didn't curse. She didn't even smirk. Instead, she looked at them with a calmness that cut deeper than anger. The silence in the room said more than any words could. And in that silence, Joram understood the truth. The tables had turned. The girl he once threw out into the cold now held the keys to his survival. Fate had brought him back to her doorstep, not as a protector but as a tenant. The day of the confrontation came like a storm. Word had already spread through the estate that the new tenants were none other than Joram and his family. Neighbors whispered about it, curious to see what would happen when the landlord, Ebony Cato herself, met the uncle who once betrayed her. By the time Joram stood in front of her office, a small crowd had gathered outside, pretending to mind their business but listening closely. Joram walked in with trembling hands, his pride crushed under the weight of his desperation. His eyes were red, his clothes worn, and his voice cracked as he spoke. "Ebony, my daughter," he began, but the words sounded weak, false, almost painful on his tongue. "Please forgive me. We are family. We made mistakes, but blood is blood. Give us a chance." His knees buckled, and before anyone could stop him, he fell to the floor, tears streaming down his cheeks. The entire neighborhood watched in silence, their hearts pounding. To see the once proud man, who had mocked and mistreated his niece, reduced to begging was almost unbelievable. His children stood behind him, ashamed, while his wife stared at the ground, unable to lift her head. Ebony stood tall, her expression calm. She did not flinch, she did not shout, and she did not let her emotions cloud her face. Her silence was heavy, and it made Joram's pleas echo even louder in the room. Finally she spoke, her voice steady and clear, every word sharp as a blade. "Family," she said softly, her eyes locked on his. "Family does not throw you out at 2 a.m. Family does not steal from you when you are grieving. Family does not call you a burden when you have lost everything." Joram's shoulders shook as he cried harder. "I was wrong," he whispered. "I was blinded by greed. Please let us stay. I beg you." The crowd outside leaned closer, waiting for her answer. Some expected revenge, others expected anger. But Ebony's response was something else entirely, something that cut deeper than hatred ever could. "I will let you stay," she said finally, her tone firm but not cruel. "Not because you deserve it but because I am not like you. You threw me into the street when I had nowhere to go. I will not throw you out even though you deserve it. That is the difference between us." Her words settled over the crowd like thunder. Some gasped, some nodded, and others whispered to each other about her strength. Joram looked up at her, broken and humbled, knowing he could never undo the scars he had left. In that moment the balance of power was clear. The girl he once abandoned was now the woman holding his fate. And while Ebony chose mercy over revenge, she also made sure he never forgot the night he had betrayed her. With shaking hands, Joram picked up the pen and signed the rental agreement. The paper in front of him was more than just a contract, it was a mirror of his downfall. Every stroke of ink reminded him that he was now a tenant in the house of the very girl he had once called nothing. His pride burned, but he had no choice. His family needed a roof, and only Ebony could give it. When the deal was done, Ebony handed him the keys without a smile, without anger, just calm dignity. "Pay your rent on time," she said simply. Her words carried no hatred, but they carried a weight he could never escape. News traveled fast through Kimbala. The story spread from house to house, market to market, until everyone knew. The orphan girl, the one who had been cast out into the cold at 2 a.m., was now the landlady of her uncle. People shook their heads in amazement. "She rose higher than anyone ever imagined," they whispered. "She turned her pain into power." But what made her story even more powerful was that she did not seek revenge. She never threw him out, never humiliated him, never gave back the cruelty he had once shown her. Instead, she gave justice wrapped in grace. He had to face the truth of his actions every single day, not through punishment, but through the quiet strength of the girl who refused to be broken. And so, Ebony's name became more than a name. It became a symbol. She showed the world that no matter how deep the pain, strength can rise from it, and dignity can shine brighter than revenge. She was no longer the orphan nobody wanted. She was a queen in her own right.